state of Kuwait today marks the 30th anniversary of the 1990 brutal invasion that severely and harshly sought to obliterate the identity of the country. Overnight, the Iraqi regime's troops turned Kuwait, the pearl of the Gulf, into a scene of utter chaos and destruction. During that time, Kuwaitis tasted agony, felt horror, and experienced the pain of the worst kinds of torture. Since the early hours of the invasion, the Kuwaiti government and people utterly rejected the flagrant aggression, and Kuwaitis both at home and overseas stood by the side of their legitimate leadership to defend their country, freedom, and sovereignty. During the invasion, the aggressors adopted a scorched earth policy, setting fire to 752 oil wells, digging trenches and filling them with oil as a barrier against the US-led international coalition troops. But thanks to the wise leadership of the late Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, the late father Emir Sheikh Saad al-Abdullah Salam al-Sabah, the late Emir Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmed al-Sabah, who was a foreign minister at the time, His Highness the Emir Sheikh Nawaf al-Ahmed al-Sabah, who was the Minister of Defense at the time, and with the assistance of the Kuwaiti people, Kuwait was able to gain support of the international community and to achieve liberation. As soon as the aggression took place, the world condemned it, and the UN Security Council issued a host of decisive resolutions, starting with Resolution 660, which demanded an immediate withdrawal of the Iraqi regime forces from Kuwait. Then other ones followed under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which sets out the UN Security Council's powers to maintain peace, thus allowing it to determine the existence of any threat to the peace, breach of the peace, or act of aggression, and to take military and non-military action to restore international peace and security. The Arab and international stances adopted similar stances, demanding the immediate withdrawal of the aggressors and holding the invading regime accountable for all the damages caused by the invasion. When the ordeal of the brutal Iraqi invasion of Kuwait intensified, His Highness the Emir Sheikh Nawaf al-Ahmed, who was Minister of Defense at that time, issued the statement dated September 23, 1990, calling for Kuwaiti youth to volunteer and take up arms to liberate and defend their beloved country, Kuwait. The statement specified the ages of the volunteers, places of registration, and places of training to join the volunteering centers. The contribution of the resistance to the political will to go to war was at least as important. The accounts of life under occupation, the atrocities and the courage of the ordinary Kuwaitis transmitted by people like Wafa al-Amir, Suad Hassan, and Asrar al-Gabandi were critical in keeping public opinion focused on the issue of human rights.
During liberation, if you go out to the streets, you will find more women than men, because most of the women in Kuwait were out looking for food supplies and various types of supplies that needed for their families. And it is astonishing that, we never think about women being that courageous to go out when you have, Iraqi troops all over the place. But the reality that they were out every day and they were really not afraid. Some kind of sense of duty that they had towards their families to go out and try to secure food. And many missions that the women carried were even moving weapons, even moving, information, data, They participated in every aspect of management of life during invasion. And they played almost a bigger role than the men did during that period inside Kuwait. So it's so ironic that although they are 50% of this community, until today we talk about do the women, they have a role? What is their political role? And do they have their rights or they don't? I mean, we never thought about these things when we were just doing them in invasion, because we were one and everybody played their role. And this is exactly what we want, is that we want a level playing field where every woman, every man play their role to the best interest without discrimination. I think that was completely demonstrated during the invasion period, and that's the natural way of living.
Years have passed since the invasion of Kuwait, an event which has carved out an irreparable scar in the heart of every Kuwaiti. A lot of women perished as heroines and are immortal in our minds, souls, and country's history. These women fought for our beloved country with all their being, until the last drop of blood was squeezed out of them, the last breath in their souls crushed by unrelenting torture. Our Kuwait heroines resonate with every beat of our hearts, and their lives will continue to be celebrated even long they are gone. May Allah bless Kuwait with peace and prosperity.
They led resistance. And by resistance, I mean inside and outside Kuwait. Inside Kuwait, they led resistance individually and in groups. Outside Kuwait, definitely, they were leading resistance within groups, and they did their roles into awareness for the foreign media, into bringing the attention of the world to what was going on in Kuwait. Within Kuwait, the women worked with the resistance, and maybe I think the impact was their role within NGOs, and they worked in all sorts of the transition of information, weapons, taking care of groups of other women and men. They played a remarkable role within the invasion.
Kuwaiti women played a prominent role in resistance to the brutal Iraqi occupation and topped the scene with her courage and sacrifices over the 7 months of the occupation, and she was the voice of challenge against the invasion, as they played pivotal and dangerous roles in providing food, health care, and all other services to the Kuwaiti society, and igniting the fierce resistance against the invasion, in addition to the involvement of some of them in the underground resistance without adhering to the traditions to restore the stolen homeland. The actions of the Kuwaiti resistance helped to retain the moral high ground for Kuwait in a way that politicians, diplomats, and public relations consultants could not. Many Kuwaitis consider women to have been the backbone of the resistance. Among their valuable services were carrying weapons and forging papers, as well as providing many of the organizational skills required to run a complex campaign. At first, the Iraqis tended to treat Kuwaiti women driving alone with respect and restraint. Most of the troops had obviously been given orders to behave with women. Recognizing this, the Kuwaiti women played the Iraqis for all they were worth by carrying concealed weapons and ammunition through checkpoints where men would have been searched. It was an incredibly dangerous task, requiring great courage, for they were completely on their own if the Iraqis discovered their cargo.
Kuwaiti women were very much at the forefront of the resistance. The occupation came as such a shock to everyone. The nation was devastated. As a nation of a very proud and patriotic people, everyone felt they wanted to do something to take back our country, men and women, but people were afraid.
Women played an important role side by side with the men. What do you think?
The women of Kuwait played such an important role. I'm so proud of their action. They took to the streets, they organized and took part in the peaceful demonstrations. These women deserve to be honored. It was a peaceful demonstrations, and they deserve to be honored. Their families and our nation should always remember their strength and their bravery.
Yes, as we know, Wafa al-Amir, Asra al-Gawandi and Khulud al-Khamis, women played an important role in the invasion. What do you remember from their lessons?
Well, they were vital to the cause in so many ways. I'm proud of their courage. I'm proud of their strength and their desire to stand up, to protect their country, their people, their own freedom. They proved that dignity is really important. And when it comes to your country, it doesn't matter if you're men and women. They actually they are a great example, a role model for all Kuwaitis, not only Kuwaiti women, but all Kuwaitis, men and women.
Kuwaiti women were mostly involved in the administration of several utilities like hospitals and grocery stores earlier in the conflict, and later helped in efforts to distribute food and money to struggling Kuwaiti families.
During that period, we heard about Saad al-Fadri dying. We heard about Asrar al-Gawandi when she was executed by the Iraqis. And we heard about all the demonstrations that took place during that period. We heard about the people that were taken by the Iraqis as POWs, Samira Ma'rifi and all. So yes, we continuously hear the continuous stream of the news, and it was all by word of mouth.
Every so often in history, there comes along a hero, unassuming these heroes stand up when others are dragged down and lead the way when all seems lost. Lucky for those around her during the invasion, Asrar Muhammad Mbarak al-Gawandi was one of those fearless warriors who poured her blood, sweat, tears, and ultimately life into the resistance movement against the oppressors of her fellow citizens. Asrar did not cower in fear or sit idly by as her country was overrun, but instead chose to face grave danger head on in what was to become a relatively short but bloody battle to restore Kuwait to its rightful owners. Born on November 23, 1959, Asrar, the sixth of her siblings, devoted her life to gaining a proper and extensive education. She was educated in Kuwait up until the age of 18 when she left for England for an English language course, and after 3 years earned her high school degree from Colorado in the US. A computer major, Asrar managed to master computer functions, which would later make her invaluable to the Kuwaiti resistance and a direct target to the Iraqis. She went on to earn 3 master's degrees in education, economics, and handicap rehabilitation. Asrar worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the Information Center, established a nursery school, and regularly volunteered at the Khalifa Pearl Association, a non-profit organization to take care of autistic children. She loved volunteering and enjoyed devoting her time to charity immensely. Little did the Iraqi invaders know when they charged into Kuwait, gentle, kind, intelligent, dignified, gracious Asrar would prove to be a far more threatening and formidable force than they could have possibly imagined from one woman. Asrar painfully watched alongside the rest of the world as her country was overrun with maniacal invaders bent on destroying everything in sight. Watching the destruction moved the deep-seated patriotic feelings inside her that would not allow her to stand aside. She immediately sprang into action and joined the resistance movement.
Asrar al-Gawandi, a woman activist who decided to give her life for her country. She owned a school for handicapped in Kuwait. She decided to work as she decided to resist the invasion herself. I don't know if I can explain that she was part of a resistance group. She led her own thoughts and ideas. She decided to resist the invasions. She decided to become a model for other women into restoring her country and into giving whatever she could for this country. And unfortunately, later on, she was tortured, and that was an impact psychologically on other men and women until November, when she was killed brutally by the Iraqi army. So Asrar al-Gabandi, I think it is a story that we will never forget. And until this day, when we speak about women, when we speak about leadership, when we speak about the love of this country, we have to mention Asrar al-Gabandi.
The first martyr woman was shot dead by Iraqi soldiers just 6 days after the regime launched an offensive to capture its tiny neighbor. Sana al-Fodiri lost her life after taking the streets to protest her country's right of independence under the leadership of the late Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah. Sana was speaking on behalf of all Kuwaitis generally and speaking, and women in particular, as she shouted, "Kuwait is for Kuwaitis. Our Emir is Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah." A number of young women stood out for their courage. Wafa al-Amir, a 23-year-old radiographer, took part in the bombing of the Kuwait International Hotel and at least 2 other bombings, including restaurants catering to Iraqi soldiers in the Khaitan and Hasawi areas. She carried out bombings in some squares in which the occupation soldiers gathered in the military area, as well as transferring weapons from Jabriya to various other places around Kuwait using change and camouflage constantly according to the group and the place of its activity in resisting.
Well, I think that was amazing to watch Kuwaiti women become directly involved in the invasion and also directly involved in supporting Kuwaitis who were remained in Kuwait. Many of them joined the resistance. In fact, one of the women that we have worked with to celebrate the 30th anniversary, Lubna Saif Abbas, was part of the resistance, and she was also in the United States and volunteered to participate in the U.S. Armed Forces as well. So women were really critical in, I think, providing supplies, food, support for those who were here in Kuwait, and also make sure that Kuwaitis could be safe and still at some point be part of the resistance. So I think women played a huge role. They should be honored. I had the opportunity to talk and speak with some of the families of the martyrs a few days ago, and it was very clear that it was very important for women to feel that they were part of freeing Kuwait and liberating Kuwait as the build-up and the war went on.
Suad al-Hassan, another story about the sacrifices of the Kuwaiti woman during the brutal Iraqi invasion. After the capture of her husband, who was a soldier by the Iraqi forces, the martyr Suad was interested in the field of civil services and cooperated with the Al-Fayha group for the national resistance, and she distributed money and food and transported weapons. In cooperation with the martyr Wafa al-Amir, Suad transported 13 pistols, despite her passing that day at 4 checkpoints. Also with Wafa, Suad provided ammunition and paste for the bombing operations carried out by the group, and among the most dangerous operations carried out was the transfer of weapons from the Sabahiyya area. Then they returned with the weapons to the group members.
Since the invasion until now, we can see that there are many heroes, and there is no difference. It's definitely proved that there is no difference between a man or a woman. As long as you're a Kuwaiti, you will find yourself pushing yourself to the exceeded limits to do your best to get the best out of yourself.
Khulud al-Khamis, a journalist, took an active part in several resistance attacks, and Amy Burhan, the teenage daughter of a deceased Kuwait Airways pilot and an Englishwoman, was alone in Kuwait at the time of the invasion, for her mother was abroad and unable to return. Amy turned her house in a quiet back street of the exclusive suburb of Mishraf into a resistance meeting place. On the first week of November, U.S. sent more troops to the Gulf. About 100,000 troops arrived to support the existing 220,000 troops in the region. On January 12th, the U.S. President George Bush managed to convince the Congress to use force to liberate Kuwait from the Iraqi invasion, resulting in Operation Desert Storm. Despite the efforts made by the international community, Iraqi army did not change its attitude at all, and they remained in Kuwait, destroying the country, trampling on human rights. Under these circumstances, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 678 that allowed the UN member countries that sent troops to the multinational forces to take all necessary means, including the use of force, if Iraq did not comply with the series of UN Security Council resolution by January 15, 1991. At midnight on January 16, 1991, the deadline set by the United Nations for the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait has ended, and immediately after the Operation Desert Storm liberating Kuwait began. The largest coalition since World War II was formed to oppose Iraq's aggression, consisting of forces from 34 countries, and was led by the American General Norman Schwarzkopf. In the morning of January 17th, after the end of the ultimatum set by the UN Security Council, air raids were launched with the participation of 1,800 warplanes from the US, UK, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. On the 24th of February, 39 days after the airstrikes, coalition forces entered at dawn into Kuwaiti and Iraqi territories. The ground forces were divided into three main groups. The first went to liberate Kuwait City, the second to surround the wing of the Iraqi army west of Kuwait, while the third group was tasked with moving in the far west and entering south of Iraqi territory to cut off all supplies to the army. On February 26, 1991, the Iraqi army withdrew from Kuwait after setting fire to Kuwait's oil fields. The U.S. President George Bush announced on February 27 the liberation of Kuwait, 100 hours after the launch of the ground operations, saying his famous phrase, "Kuwait today is free."
Of the invasion, I was working in the policy office at the Pentagon that focused on Middle East affairs, and so our responsibility as an office was to develop the policy and implement a lot of the diplomatic engagement and military engagement to build up the U.S. and coalition presence here in the region. We also had an opportunity as a private citizen also to be able to watch what was going on with the Iraqi invasion in real time, because for the first time we had journalists really here and embedded, and it was watching television, and you could see what was going on. So it was a very heartfelt moment that the world could watch as this was going on.
On the Liberation Day, Iraq announced the withdrawal of its forces from Kuwait, but continued to reject UN resolutions issued against it. In retaliation, before its departure, the Iraqi troops launched an attack on the environment of the Arabian Gulf and bombed one of the largest Kuwaiti oil fields near the Saudi Arabian border, two major mainland refineries, an offshore loading terminal, and anchored tankers. The Iraqi troops pumped several million barrels of oil into the Arabian Gulf from supply lines between the refineries and an offshore terminal, creating a slick at least 9 miles long. The spill immediately affected the wildlife in the region, including migratory birds and sea turtles.
Well, one of the significant pollution is a dangerous one, which has a direct danger on people, is the minefields. We had minefields spread all over Kuwait in both terrestrial area and the desert and also the coastline. A lot of efforts has been done since then to remove the mines from those locations, but still we still can notice and monitor from time to time, especially after heavy rain.
So has Kuwait fully recovered from the environmental damage caused the invasion?
Actually, no, because this kind of pollution would take a very long time for the rehabilitation. So one of the things that we had to do also, we had to make a campaign, an awareness campaign to let the people know about the 6th of November. This kind of awareness will let people know for sure how devastating is that kind of pollution and how long does it take to get fixed. Okay, definitely it will take a long time, and for sure it will need to spend a lot of money, and you can see that from the environmental awards that already was assigned from the UNCC.
One day like these 30 years ago, a Kuwaiti woman wore her yellow clothes, her protective helmet on her head, and braved the hell of fires that caught the oil wells as a result of the Iraqi occupation. The former Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Ahmed al-Rubai, may God have mercy on him, called her the Iron Lady of Kuwait when he addressed her saying, "You are more deserving than Margaret Thatcher by the title of Iron Lady."
If we remember the period during this invasion, it was one of the worst periods anyone can live through, because what we lost was basically our security and our safety. The same, it's ironic because security and safety is something that we Kuwaitis take for granted. So in Kuwait, most of the people do not lock their doors until today. I mean, we came back to that same conclusion. We don't lock the door. We live in a very peaceful, safe environment. But we missed that. We lost that during invasion. We could no more feel the security. We could no more feel safe at home, because anytime the Iraqis would come and they will search the house or take the material or take someone. So the feeling of security and safety is a basic need of humans. And I explain it the way it's like oxygen in the air. We take oxygen in the air like granted, but the minute you lose oxygen, you immediately feel the loss. And this was the situation we were living in. Until, of course, the 26th of February, where we were liberated, and that's the day that we could breathe again. Although the air was completely polluted, but that was the time we could breathe again, because our safety and security came back with the troops that came.
At that time, at the invasion exactly, did you hear about the Kuwaiti women who participate in the war?
Yes, of course. I mean, in Kuwait, this is a very small community that you have in Kuwait, and we hear everything, during that period, we had only landlines, so the telephones were only landlines, we didn't have the mobiles. But the word of mouth used to spread in Kuwait like anything. So if somebody sent a message in the morning, by evening, all the Kuwaitis would have heard it.
30 years have passed since the invasion of Kuwait, an event which has carved out an irreparable scar in the heart of every Kuwaiti. A lot of women perished as heroines and are immortal in our minds, souls, and country's history. These women fought for our beloved country with all their being until the last drop of blood was squeezed out of them, the last breath in their souls crushed by unrelenting torture. Our Kuwait heroines resonate with every beat of our hearts, and their lives will continue to be celebrated even long they are gone. May Allah bless Kuwait with peace and prosperity.